Buddy, I am Dr. Andrew Neville, and welcome to our live Q&A where we're going to talk about anything and everything that is or isn't this mysterious condition that we call adrenal fatigue. One of the most misunderstood conditions that is out there today. I've been specializing in treating what we call adrenal fatigue for about 20 years here since I struggled with it in my past, and have since kind of made it my purpose to be able to bring the most accurate information we possibly can to you, to everyone, to anybody who listens. So again, welcome. As I'm just double checking whether or not we're live and in all the right places, so my coaches can let me know. Excellent, thank you. Please, by all means, leave us a comment. And while we're kind of getting started, let us know who you are, where you're from. We're always curious to find out where people are from. So both in North America, but we've got international people as well. Okay, and it looks like we're in good shape. So I've got a bunch of questions that have been submitted. Just FYI, we've got a couple of programs that we use for to treat adrenal fatigue. The patients that are in those programs tend to get kind of priority bidding as far as questions go. So I'm going to hit those questions first. I suppose that's one of the perks. But if you have any questions, concerns live, by all means, just share them. I've got my amazing team kind of manning the comments. They will put links to things. They will answer your questions as they come in. And if a question comes in directly for me, they'll throw it on my list and we will get to that. Those programs that I mentioned, I'll just make a kind of a brief point. We now have, starting this year, I'm incredibly thrilled to be able to provide a couple different programs for people that can't necessarily work with me one-on-one. Where over the past couple of years, I've put down, documented, and have recorded just about every bit of advice and guidance and counseling and suggestions that I've made in the programs that we have where people would come to our guest house and stay with us for an extended period of time. But even in our all access program, I've documented all that stuff so that it's accessible to people who get testing and they get a self-paced type of a program as well. So I'm thrilled to offer those, and they'll put links to those things down below as well. So as you join in, let us know who you are, where you're from, and what I'm going to do is just jump into some of these questions. So let me just double check to make sure we're okay with my team. Seems good. Nicole says, can low back pain come from the adrenals near the kidneys? ? They are near the kidneys. Can eating a lot of protein be bad for the kidneys? Okay. She's got a couple questions, so we're going to go through these. Low back pain. It's possible. There is an old sign where that we used to use, not we, because it was before my time, where the adrenals would actually swell. So the adrenals sit on top of each kidney. They're very separate from the kidneys, but they sit on top, perched on top, hence the name adrenal. So above the renal, the kidney. So the adrenals sit on top of the kidneys. They exist in a fibrous capsule. And when the adrenals are taxed and overworked, they can swell within that fibrous capsule. And that can cause a pressure sensation, which can feel like an ache, sometimes even a little bit of a stab. Could be one side or the other, could be both sides. And people would notice that ache and that pain. I forget the name of the sign in particular, but it is possible. And I guess you would think it's more possible if you're going through a period of higher stress of any kind, and all of a sudden you notice this kind of ache in that area, then chances are it might be. Of course, there's lots of reasons for back pain. That is not necessarily low back pain, right? The kidneys are protected by those bottom ribs. So just above that, kind of in that transition space from your lumbar into your thoracic vertebrae, you can get some aches and pains in there, especially if it's associated with stress. So it's possible. Can eating a lot of protein be bad for the kidneys? Not really. No, protein's fine. Kidneys can process this stuff. I mean, for thousands of years, we've been eating lots of different, proteins and fats and carbs and things like that. So there's no problem with the protein. My guess is you're referring to the hypoglycemic diet, which is a pretty essential part of dealing with, or a pretty essential way to eat if anybody's got adrenal fatigue, because that's one of the main jobs your adrenal has, is to control your blood sugar. So if you can control your blood sugar by how you eat, that's less work for your adrenals, and your adrenals can do other stuff. Your poor adrenals got to deal with any and all stress, right? So there's a lot for this system to do, especially in today's kind of modern, fast-paced, quick, somewhat toxic, occasionally obnoxious world that we live in. So if you can take that one out of there, kind of scooping that out of the bucket, it's a big help, but the protein's fine. Quercetin so still Nicole, quercetin and resveratrol seem like great products to support the adrenals. Quercetin helps with my allergies. Resveratrol seems to help my stamina. Cool, but I'm wondering, could they, if combined, lower blood sugar too low? When I stopped taking resveratrol, seeing my blood sugar stopped dipping too low with the hypoglycemic diet. I'm not sure if it's that. In general, these things, and I tend to use, so quercetin and resveratrol, these are kind of phytonutrients, bioflavonoids. Quercetin is in the food supply and yellow foods primarily, and resveratrol is in red wine, I guess, right? That's the big thing. You got to drink a lot of red wine to get enough resveratrol, so I wouldn't advise doing that. But you can get these things in supplemental form. I use quercetin and resveratrol quite commonly. Quercetin is something that acts as it's one of the better natural antihistamines that we have. And anybody with adrenal problems, or the vast majority of people with adrenal problems, are going to have some immune compromise. So we tend to use some antihistamines to help with like allergies and sensitivities to things. Resveratrol has a lot of different beneficial effects. Tends to work on a cellular level, kind of deep inside the cells themselves. And it helps with mitochondria function. Mitochondria are important as the little energy producers in the cells. All cells have hundreds, if not thousands, of mitochondria. All cells, nothing happens in the body if the mitochondria are impaired. And the mitochondria do get impaired or dysfunctional with kind of chronic stress over time or adrenal fatigue, because the metabolic exhaust of like being in fight or flight all the time, right? Kind of running from the proverbial tiger in whatever shape or form it's in that day. The metabolic exhaust of that is what we call oxidative stress or free radicals, and that can damage the mitochondria. So resveratrol helps to heal them and even stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the building or creation within the cell of new mitochondria, which is a pretty cool thing. It's one of the only things that does that. It also encourages neuroplasticity and helps to kind of rewire the brain, the limbic system, which is kind of the CEO of this stress response system. Generally, these things improve the efficiency of cells. Could they lower the blood sugar too much? Anything tends to be possible in people with adrenal fatigue, but because we tend to be on the more sensitive side. In fact, my predecessor, Dr. Posnecker, he said that if you had to describe somebody with adrenal fatigue with one word, and that was the only word you could use, that word would have to be sensitive. And sure enough, I couldn't agree more. And we're sensitive on all kinds of different levels. So you might have to do some trial and error with it. You might have to adjust your dose a little bit. If I don't know, 2 capsules seems to mess with your blood sugar a little bit, lowers it. And again, it shouldn't. It's more of a modulator, right? So that it can help to make the cells more efficient. But again, anything's possible. So play with that dose. And you're going to have to do a little bit of a test to kind of play detective with that. Okay. Elizabeth says, I have MTHFR. MTHFR mutation, which apparently is also causing problems with absorbing and utilizing B vitamins. Okay, so is a very common snippet or genetic mutation, right? And when we're dealing with genes, we've got two genes, right? And so we're talking homozygous or heterozygous. Do you have two SNPs or kind of dysfunctional genes, or do you just have one? MTHFR is one of the very more commonly tested genetic mutations that are out there now. And this genetic testing, ever since we had the Human Genome Project, a lot of people are testing the genes. MTHFR is one of the most common ones that are out there. So common, in fact, that I tend to pretty much assume most of my patients have it, right? Whether you're homozygous, heterozygous. And the thing is, so MTHFR helps with our utilization of B vitamins, especially B12, folic acid. We tend to need to bypass this mutation with more of an activated form of B12 or folic acid. It's so incredibly common. I generally recommend a multivitamin to patients. So that multivitamin tends to have these activated B vitamins to bypass that glitch. The conversation with genetics is an important one because we all have this certain kind of concept with regard to the genes, right? Thinking about, primarily it's like, okay, do I get blue eyes or brown eyes, right? It's hard, it's fixed. We have genetic tendencies for, every function, every process, all cells or all organs in our body, but it's not as simple as just the genetic blueprint. It's also the epigenetics, which is which of those blueprints do we read at any one particular time? And this is important because epigenetics we don't have control over. Epigenetics we absolutely do. When our body is in stress physiology, right, what we call fight or flight, which happens all too often with a genetic predisposition and enough chronic stress over time to overwhelm those genetics, kind of what we call adrenal fatigue. When we're in fight or flight, we read an entirely different set of blueprints, the set of blueprints that are geared for, producing energy for survival, right? As opposed to the opposite physiologic state when we're in rest and digest, which is, basically where we do all our healing and repair. Okay, so kind of vacation mode is the difference, right? So fight or flight, rest and digest. When we're in vacation mode, right, or when we're sleeping, for most of us, right, during the day we're in fight or flight a little bit, then we go to sleep, heal, repair. We turn on a whole different set of blueprints, or we read a whole different set of blueprints, which means we turn on a whole different set of genes, which are organized for the healing and repair, cellular processes, detox, things like that. So depending on our physiologic state, we will express certain genes at any one time or another. So we don't want to get too caught up into just the hard genetics because there's not a whole lot of control there. What we can focus on is the epigenetics, and epigenetics, it's this nature versus nurture kind of conversation, right? We can control that expression. So MTHFR is incredible. And I guess the last thing I'd say is MTHFR is incredibly common in the population, but not everybody with MTHFR has adrenal fatigue. So it's only one kind of little piece of this puzzle, and it's not that it causes adrenal fatigue. It's one little piece. Okay. Marta says, what hormonal or blood test is good to check when experiencing fatigue and headaches? I'm 41 years old and have 2 young kids. Okay, so by the time my patients come into me, they've had symptoms, and usually for a while they've had symptoms. Could be a few months. More often, it's a few years, a few decades, even possibly. And by that time, they've had these various symptoms, whether it's fatigue or pain or headaches, like Marta says, or sleep problems, brain fog, cognitive function, anxiety, depression, you name it. And they've gone to doctors for these things. So, your doctors will test and try to find out what's going on. Is there any kind of organic type of a problem that they can find? And the vast majority of the time, all of that blood work, your typical, CBCs, CMPs, things like that, vast majority of the time, that stuff will come back normal, which is actually a good thing, right? Because they're trying to rule out, really dangerous stuff, right? Stuff that can kill you. So you want to rule out all that stuff, and that's a good thing to do. But that's not a good way to test for adrenal fatigue. The way we want to test for adrenal fatigue, and so Marta, you mentioned hormones in general, right? There are three main hormone producing glands in the body, right? We've got your adrenals, your thyroid, and your ovaries or testes. There's other hormone producing glands, of course, but this kind of triad these are the big ones. I used to think of these glands as kind of like almost like a three-legged stool, because they all talk to each other and everything, which gets kind of confusing as far as endocrinology goes and what hormones are going on. I used to think of them as a three-legged stool, but I've actually changed that concept, because what I've learned is that as goes the adrenals, so too will go those other two. And here's why. When we have adrenal fatigue, it's basically our body tends to be stuck in stress physiology for, whatever reason that might be. And that could be past stress. Well, there's a genetic predisposition, but then there's past stress and trauma, but everything, right? We all kind of fill up this bucket of tolerance for stress that we have in all the various ways we do. When our physiology is kind of stuck in fight or flight, we know definitively that certain things happen, right? We're going to activate certain organs that would save our life, right? Because fight or flight is, the body thinks there's a tiger in front of us. That's kind of what happens. So let's turn on your heart, turn on your lungs, turn on some sugar metabolism so you have energy and fuel to fight this tiger. So we turn those organs on, but then we turn a bunch of other organs off. Immune system, there's four big ones: immune, digestive, reproductive, and thyroid. We know definitively that excess stress hormone goes to what we call the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian hormone axis, suppresses it. Hypothalamic pituitary thyroid hormone axis suppresses it. We know that. And it makes sense too, actually, if you think about it. If there's a tiger in front of you, you don't want to waste energy for the immune system fighting some chronic infection or healing some inflammatory response or whatever. Like, forget about that. Deal with the tiger. We'll turn that on later. Same thing happens with the gut. Don't waste energy digesting, absorbing. Don't really want you to have a bowel movement now, right? There's a tiger in front of you. The ovaries go the same way, right? Suppress it. We don't care about your periods. We don't care about your sex life. Again, don't really want you to procreate right now. There's a tiger, right? So we end up suppressing all those things. So most of my patients who have adrenal fatigue, they've got problems, yes, with the adrenal hormones, but also with the ovarian hormones and thyroid hormones. But the key is you got to deal with that adrenal issue first, because that's what's suppressing those hormones. Like, I just had a patient yesterday who had, her hormones were off, right? Low testosterone, low progesterone, estrogen, not so bad. So what did the doctor do? The doctor wants to just throw her on hormones, which is okay. But my question is always, why? Like, why does this woman, she was in her early 40s as well, why does this woman have these low hormones? What causes that? I mean, yes, you can replace the hormones, but why? And the main answer to that question is stress physiology, because stress is going to suppress those very hormones. To test, sorry for the long-winded answer, to test for the adrenals, you basically want to look at your main adrenal hormones, so cortisol and DHEA. Saliva testing tends to be the best way to assess for these hormones, because saliva testing tests the free hormone value, whereas when you get a blood test, that tests all your hormones. And when I say all, I mean, like, if we're looking at cortisol specifically, hormone exists and just floats around in the blood. It's either free or bound to a protein. The hormone that's bound to a protein isn't active. It doesn't really do anything. It's just kind of ready in wait. And there's actually a small percentage of that hormone that's actually free hormone. So we kind of want that free cortisol. It's only about 5% for cortisol. The numbers vary for some of those other hormones, but that's the active hormone. So that's what we want to test. So we tend to do a saliva test that gets cortisol and DHEA. The one we use gets a few other parameters as well, which I like. It's a 4-point saliva test, right? So cortisol defines our circadian rhythm. It's nice and high in the morning, gradually goes down, should be at its lowest level in the evening, go to bed. We want to catch it at all those various times, right? So usually a 4-point cortisol test to give us a cortisol. DHEA is really crucial to get as well. DHEA is kind of it's a kind of a misunderstood, kind of unassuming type of a hormone, but DHEA is an incredibly important hormone. DHEA is an adrenal hormone. It's both men and women have DHEA, varying levels. DHEA is more of an androgen. It's more of a male type of hormone. But pound for pound, we have more DHEA than any other hormone in our body. It's incredibly important. If we look specifically at research, it helps with immune system function. It helps with cognitive function as well. Even thermogenesis, metabolism, weight. There are some doctors, like anti-aging doctors, will use it for like weight loss kind of stuff. There are two patterns of DHEA in our life: age and stress. The age pattern is DHEA is highest when we're young, then it kind of plateaus 20, 30, 40, and then after 40 it starts coming down. But the other pattern is stress. So when we get stressed, cortisol goes up, and DHEA goes up too. But you can kind of become deficient in those hormones when it's overused. And with regard to the adrenals, the body prioritizes cortisol over DHEA because we can't live without cortisol. But DHEA just kind of helps make life worth living, but we can live without it. So DHEA will commonly drop before cortisol in most people over time. And the DHEA and cortisol, looking at those together, is really important to determine kind of what stage or phase of condition that somebody's in. So preferably, that's what I want to look at is the saliva testing. You can get some thyroid hormones in the blood, which is not a bad idea. But again, I tend to defer to looking at the adrenal issues first because that's what's controlling, right? That's what's pulling the strings. And I know that I talk about the adrenals all the time, and this is it's a common, misunderstanding, I guess. By the way, let us know. So those of you out there, let us know who you are and where you're from. Put that in the comments, which would be great so that we can kind of know. We've got people all over the country and even international patients as well. So we're always curious. And of course, if you have any questions, throw them out there. Whatever they are, my incredible crew will man those questions and they'll get those to me. I talk about this condition in terms of the adrenals, but it's more than that. And this is one of the biggest problems out there, or misunderstandings with regard to adrenal fatigue. The adrenals are the ones that produce your major stress hormones. And I give those hormones a bad rap quite a bit because of all the damage they cause. But they're life-saving. Again, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have those hormones. But the adrenals, they don't decide whether or not to release that hormone or not. Somebody tells them what to do. So if there's an adrenal problem, there's got to be a problem with whoever tells your adrenals what to do. So to find those glands, we got to go into the brain. There's two master endocrine glands in the brain, your hypothalamus and your pituitary. They control primarily the adrenals, the thyroid, and the ovaries. And again, if the adrenals go south, they'll drag down those other two as well. But that's only the hormone side of your stress response. There's a whole other division over here, which is nerves. Now, this is the part of your nervous system that controls your organs. So we call it your autonomic nervous system. They work together. The hormone side and the nerve side tend to work together to control this physiologic balance. But neither of them actually call the shots. The CEO, if you will, of your stress response is a step above that hypothalamus in a deep central part of the brain called the limbic system. And the limbic system is not a thinking part of our brain. It's more of a reacting part of our brain. It controls some pretty basic functionality, things like temperature regulation, what else? Appetite and hunger, even sleep-wake cycles to a degree. But that limbic system, its main job is to constantly be assessing your environment for danger. It's always assessing your external environment, receiving information from senses and perception. It's assessing your internal environment, receiving information from chemicals in the blood supply. When it receives that information, it's just got to react. Is this stimulus harmful, dangerous? Can this thing kill me? Do I got to jump this body into fight or flight, hormones, nerves? Or is it the opposite? It's harmless, innocuous. I can, chill out in vacation mode and just let it pass. What happens is with stress over time and that stress hormone, those hormones hitting the limbic system and kind of nicking and pinging and kind of damaging things, that limbic system gets trigger happy. We call it sensitization. So what that means is the limbic system starts to overinterpret its environment as being dangerous. Minor stressors don't generate a minor response, right? We make mountains out of molehills. So minor stress, major response. And then what happens over time is that our physiology starts to get stuck in fight or flight. And this is really the crux of the problem because, again, those hormones are life-saving if you use them once in a while. But if you turn that physiology on all the time, it creates tremendous damage in the body, tremendous wear and tear. And again, this is well documented in the research, in the stress research, where you will see fatigue, pain, weight problems, up or down, cognitive issues, brain fog, we tend to call it. What else? Pain, weight, so anxiety, depression, even blood sugar, blood pressure problems will come about because of that imbalance. So all of those symptoms will associate with this thing we call adrenal fatigue. But again, it's way more than just adrenal fatigue. In fact, there's no great name. Adrenal fatigue is not a good name for this. The best, or at least the most accurate name for this condition is actually to call it a stress response system dysfunction. It includes your adrenals, but there's way more to it. So when you have that stress response system dysfunction, your body is basically stuck here. In order to get ahead of this, you can't just pay attention to the adrenals. And there's a little more information about adrenal fatigue, not necessarily in conventional medicine, because conventional docs are taught that adrenal fatigue isn't a thing, right? So if you're wondering this question, my doc says adrenal fatigue is not a thing. Well, I don't know. They may or may not be right, but we just don't have a good name for this condition that we have. But what they're taught is that if you don't have Addison's disease, right, which is complete adrenal failure, it exists. It's incredibly rare, but it exists, where the adrenals aren't working at all. Once they can rule out Addison's disease, and as long as you don't have some other weird adrenal tumor, pituitary tumor, which is pretty easy to rule out, then the idea is you can't have an adrenal problem. Now, that doesn't even hold water if I think about it logically, right? Because they'll let you have, let's say, an ovarian hormone problem. If we look at the rest of the endocrine system, you're allowed to have an ovarian hormone problem short of complete failure. You're allowed to have a thyroid hormone problem short of complete failure, but not your adrenals. If your adrenals are working at all, they're perfect. Nothing could be further from the truth, but that's basically what they're taught. To get ahead of this, you can't just pay attention to the adrenals. You can't just take a little vitamin C, a little ginseng, a little ashwagandha or whatever, and fix kind of everything that I just described. You can fix it. You absolutely can, but you've got to target all these various pieces in a more holistic way. And we'll probably talk more about that. Okay, so sorry for the long-winded answer. Okay, so I'll go on to the next question. So Teresa says, how do you treat the limbic system? Okay, good question. Lots of ways to treat the limbic system. It's basically about kind of this physiologic shift, right, to me, because Yes, we want to heal the limbic system, desensitize it, calm it down, and settle it down, right? But if our physiology is kind of stuck here, remember I said that the metabolic exhaust of fighting tigers all the time is all that stress hormone. That's what causes the damage and keeps this limbic system trigger happy. So really it's about kind of shifting this physiology in whatever way we can. Conceptually, you can think about it as us all having this one stress response system, right? Hormone side, nerve side, limbic system in the brain. And what that means is that that system has to deal with any and all stress, any and all stress. So I picture it like a bucket. We all have this certain size bucket, right? Genetically, half from mom, half from dad. There's your bucket. And some are small, some are big. I mean, you can overwhelm anybody's bucket if you throw enough at them. The thing is, this bucket wasn't really designed for the stress we have today. It was designed for like old school stress, hardship, right? Give me a good old fashioned famine, right? Or a plague or a predator or something jumps out at us. That bucket fills up. We jump into fight or flight to deal with it, hopefully. And then if we live, the bucket drains. We shift out of fight or flight. So we turn off the damage, turn on rest and digest, where we heal, repair. We live to fight another day. We don't have stress like that these days, most of us. These days, we start filling up this bucket from a very early age. And again, any and all stress, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social stress, diet and nutrition, toxins, surgeries, bad infections, accidents, injuries, especially head injuries, because head injuries can kind of whack that limbic system and make it trigger happy too. But even past trauma, right? We know childhood trauma sets people up for this because it sensitizes that system. Trauma, abuse, of course, but just life, right? Whether it's school, relationships, divorces, and finances, and work, and traffic, and social media, and politics, like it all goes into that same bucket. And it's as that bucket fills up that we tend to get stuck. So conceptually, what we have to do is create a little space in that bucket. We don't have to empty the bucket. That's not the real world. We don't exist that way. In fact, we can't exist that way. If we didn't have any stress in our life, we'd wither up and die, right? But we just need to create a little bit of space. And there's two ways we do that. Is you want to pay a little attention to what's in the bucket. Not a ton. There are a lot of practitioners that spend a ton of time and unfortunately can waste patients' kind of time, energy, and money on chasing after everything in that bucket. But let's create a little space in that bucket by paying attention to what's in there, but also by healing that stress response system. You can make the bucket bigger. You can expand that bucket, which also creates space. Now there's tolerance, right? So we can start to loosen up this trigger happy stress response. One of the ways, there's a variety of ways, and the way to heal this whole system is basically figuring out kind of what your therapeutic puzzle looks like with relation to this stress response system dysfunction. And there's some common pieces of that puzzle, but everybody's puzzle is a little different. It definitely diverges outside of that. And as an aside, I mean, the only way I've figured out how to kind of dial in what that puzzle looks like for everybody is with contact, right? With frequent contact with patients. And so I mentioned the programs earlier that we run, and those programs are based on the care that we used to give patients. So we've got a guest house on our property here, and people would come from all over the country to get treated for this, adrenal fatigue thing. A couple weeks, couple months even. By the time I would send those patients home, they're already feeling a little better. Not fixed. You don't fix this thing in 8 weeks, right? But they're shifting and they can see and feel that. They know what that looks like. And then by the time they leave, they've got a plan. They've got an understanding of the plan. They've got tools to implement the plan. So not only would they feel better quicker, but they would stay better longer. And to me, that's healing, right? That's what healing is all about. Understand what you're dealing with. Get ahead of it. know how to manage it, and then go live your life. And honestly, stay away from as many doctors as you can, including me. Problem with that is most people don't have the resources to come and hang out with us and get that level of care. So that's when I started working on a couple different programs that we have. I have an all-access program where I will still work one-on-one with patients. But I've got a couple other step-down programs for people who can't do the one-on-one stuff, which incorporates kind of all that information to be able to guide people through this. That's our core and our core plus program. And if you're interested, I mean, these programs help people. The most efficient, effective way to do it is this all access program to get ahead of this, but the other programs work as well. And my coaches will put the links in the comments below if you're interested. One of the core ways I'd say to heal the limbic system, to go back to Teresa's question, is a relaxation exercise. Believe it or not. A consistent mind-focusing relaxation exercise is a central piece of everybody's puzzle. It's not the only piece. And don't hear that I'm saying, oh, he told me to meditate and that's going to fix all my problems. No, it's not. That's not what's going to happen. But it is a piece of the puzzle. It's got to be consistent, right? So it's got to be on a daily basis. And then the methodology, we need to have this mind focusing bit where we focus intently on one thing, even though most people can't. So here's what I tell people to do. You want to start with 10 minutes, right? 10 minutes twice a day, quiet, comfortable, sitting, lying down, whatever. Close your eyes, focus on one thing, whatever it is. It could be a word, it could be your breath, it could be a picture or an image, it could be a phrase, short memorized phrase, repetitive prayer. And we all have different names for this: deep breathing or guided imagery, visualization, meditation, whatever. It doesn't matter really what you focus on. Focus on this one thing. You're not going to be able to, right? Your mind's going to dance away. When your mind goes away, if you catch it, just catch it and bring it back. One of the biggest fallacies with regard to this relaxation exercise thing is we think, and I used to think the same thing, is that if I can't stay focused on this one thing, it's not worth doing. I'm not going to get the benefit. Not true. All you have to do is try. And really, it's all in the redirect. So you're going to try, your mind's going to go away, bring it back. And then within seconds, it'll be something, just bring it back. What this starts to do is it starts to rewire this limbic system. Now, again, that limbic system is a default, right? Our default in the limbic system is kind of negative, unfortunately, fear, worry, trying to look for danger, right? That's what the limbic system is doing, is trying to protect us, right? So it's always looking for danger. And there's plenty of stuff for the limbic system to worry about in our lives today, unfortunately. So the pathway from stimulus to limbic system to stress hormone, it's so well worn. It's not even a pathway for most of us anymore. It's not even a road. It's like a highway, right? Boom, boom, boom. Here I am constantly, right? And in neurology, they say nerves that fire together, wire together. And it's true. I mean, it's just a reinforced pathway. Doing a consistent mind-focusing relaxation exercise starts to rewire, and we start to generate new neural pathways, away, right, from fight or flight, so that when there's a stimulus, there's a choice, right? It doesn't have to go to fight or flight. It can stay and rest and digest, and we can start to loosen up this physiology. It's really a key component. There's a great kind of research study that was done, it was a couple of years ago, where they put people through, and they had MRIs of these people's brains before and after, put people through a 6-week mindfulness meditation course, and they saw increases in hippocampal volume. Hippocampus is one of these little organs in the limbic system, along with the amygdala and the insula. It all kind of works as a system. Increases in hippocampal volume, literally changing the brain. And we used to think that didn't happen, right? But over the past probably 15 plus years now, the the most exciting thing to me in neuroscience is this concept of neuroplasticity, right? Where we can kind of change this. The brain is always kind of learning, rewiring, or reinforcing and wiring towards fight or flight. And this is the problem, right? Because there's too much wear and tear if we're fighting or running from tigers all the time. So that's one of the key ways to start. There are other ways. There are certain substances, like we were talking earlier, quercetin, resveratrol. They have some effects on this limbic system, and there's some other things, and there's other practices as well. But again, it's not just about the limbic system. When we to effectively treat this whole thing, we want to focus on all these pieces, right? Limbic system, but also the hormone side, the nerve side. Treat all that together, and that's the most efficient way to get this thing to shift. Okay. Okay. Pause. Diana says, my ACTH was 19. Doc wanted it over 18. What are your thoughts on this? So there's another hormone test. ACTH is when we look at what we call the HPA axis, right? So the hormone side of your stress response ends in the adrenals, dumping cortisol and adrenaline. Well, it starts with the limbic system telling the hypothalamus to trigger that cascade. Hypothalamus releases something called CRH, corticotrophin releasing hormone, to trigger the pituitary. The pituitary then releases ACTH to then trigger the adrenals to release the stress hormone, right? That's your HPA axis. So they will test for a variety of hormones. What they're trying to do is say, is it primary adrenal issues, or secondary, being primary adrenal, secondary pituitary, even tertiary, which is a hypothalamic problem. It's never one, because they all talk to each other. It's all of it. If your ACTH is off and your doctor says they want it at a certain level, and I don't know the exact levels for ACTH, then there's a problem within that HPA axis, and you probably are looking at what we would affectionately call adrenal fatigue, which is really a problem with your whole stress response system. So it's that stress response system dysfunction. And just so you know, the adrenal hormones, they work on what we call a negative feedback loop, where once the adrenals are stimulated, they release the cortisol primarily. That cortisol is going to get back to the brain. The hypothalamus is going to recognize that and be like, okay, there's enough cortisol here. I can stop stimulating this process, right? But if your adrenals aren't producing enough cortisol, that message might not get back to the hypothalamus and pituitary, and that axis will just keep going, almost like you're kind of whipping a tired horse, right? And the adrenals are trying, but they're like, I'm exhausted, I can't do it. So if those levels are low, you're going to see the ACTH tend to go up. But I would look more so at salivary cortisol testing to see kind of what else is going on there. Okay. Okay. So Nicole says, is there a natural form of Xanax for stressful moments in life that can't be avoided? Okay. So Xanax is a benzodiazepine. It's a anti-anxiety med. And most of my patients are treated with antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, because, most of my patients are here. When you dump a bunch of stress hormone in the brain, you're going to develop anxiety, depression, things like that. And doctors will recognize those symptoms as things in and of themselves without kind of attention to the underlying cause. And they'll use meds to try to cover up the symptoms, right? And they're uncomfortable, right? So I'm not against using medications for these things. But when you're just covering up symptoms, you're not necessarily fixing the underlying cause, and that damage persists over time. So to me, when you're chasing symptoms with meds, you're kind of just putting a little piece of tape over the check engine light in your car. Well, you don't see it anymore, but you're not fixing the problem, and it'll potentially get worse. In the natural world, is there anything as strong as a benzodiazepine? And the answer is no, there isn't. The benzodiazepines are strong and somewhat effective for people, not everybody, but the challenge is they come with a bunch of side effects, right? Plus dependency and issues. You can get cellular change. I will share that there is a natural product that we will use at times, which has a modulating effect on cortisol, called Serophos. Serophos is a derivative of a particular phospholipid called phosphatidylserine. So Serophos is something that can be used fairly safely, especially if there's high cortisol levels. If we see that, there is no slam dunk that works like Xanax in that way, but Serophos is one of the things that can be helped. I'm also, not opposed to kind of CBD type products, things like that as well. So there are definitely options, right? But again, it's focusing on everything, creating space. Once we start to create space in that bucket, then you have more tolerance to stress, right? And we don't need all those, Band-Aids basically to cover up the symptoms. Okay. Can a 24-hour urinalysis test help to discover anything with free hormone like cortisol or only saliva? Yes. So there are urine tests, both urine tests and saliva testing, that can test for free hormone levels. So you can do either. It's not a urinalysis necessarily. It's a specific urine test. The more common one that's out there is this Dutch test, which is okay. I just tend to prefer the saliva. I like the specific one that we use because it's more than just cortisol and DHEA. There's a couple other values that kind of guide me a little bit. But yeah, you could do a Dutch test or a urine. It's like a dried urine spot test. Both measure free cortisol and both are fine. Okay, Kelly says, oh boy. All right. So we've got a lot of questions. I appreciate all the questions. By all means, ask more questions. We'll get them in here. You get a little preference if you're live and you have a question. My crew will bump that up in the document. So we'll be able to get to those. Kelly says, Dr. Neville, why does adrenal fatigue affect the legs so severely? They're like cement when climbing stairs or any incline exhausting. Thank you. Okay. What we know is that stress physiology, and this is for all mammals that I know of, when we initiate a stress response, there are 3 primary muscle groups that get initiated right away. Large muscles in the arms, large muscles in the legs, and actually the jaw, believe it or not. Muscles in the arms, muscles in the legs, that makes sense to me, right? We're fighting or fleeing or whatever, we need that energy. The jaw, I don't know, this is probably some primordial response, biting or yelling or screaming or whatever it is, which is why, by the way, many of my patients will have TMJ or jaw pain or their grinders, things like that. It's that same underlying mechanism. Muscles are built to do work, right? To contract, but then relax. If we're in fight or flight all the time and you're constantly stimulating those muscles, then they tend to become dysfunctional, right? And they're not as good at kind of nutrients in and waste products out, things like that. And you can basically tire them out, right? So you're overworking those legs, which is why the energy from a muscular standpoint and just overall energy will tend to go down, but it does tend to hit the legs in a big way. There's nothing specifically I can recommend to help with the legs, but I can tell you that as we shift this physiology, that stamina and the strength, little by little by little, that will come back so that you don't have to worry about it anymore. But be cautious, you don't want to overdo it. We do have to kind of pace ourselves in the beginning because we're at limited energy. Like I have patients come into my office and they're, some of them are functioning at 10%, 20% functional capacity, some at 50, 60, 70, right? Depending on how dysfunctional you are, right? We have to kind of pace ourselves and try not to push beyond our current capacity, which is, challenging from a variety of levels. So that's why. Okay. Jean says, I'm 75, cortisol, saliva, all flat, but a slight rise at night. Serotonin, dopamine, all flat on on money worth testing, but insulin, hypothyroid, no T3. Okay, I'm not sure what that part means, but yeah, so cortisol flat. So that's a pretty common curve for the cortisol tends to flat. In the research, they call it the low flat curve of chronic stress. And it's also pretty common for the back end to kick up. So that can mess with sleep as well. The neurotransmitter dysfunction that comes along with this is pretty common, but also pretty predictable because the neurotransmitter system is the one system that the body tries to use to protect itself from this stress physiology. Meaning, when our stress physiology is kicking in, it's like pedal to the metal, right? Like you're driving this Ferrari of a car, 100 miles an hour, right? Pedal to the metal. The body tries to hit the brakes, and the way it hits the brakes is with the inhibitory neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, dopamine to a degree. The thing is, nothing trumps the stress response and stress physiology, nothing in the body. If we could electively kind of control that and like we all probably would have died out thousands of years ago, but the neurotransmitters try, but eventually the brakes give out. This is why most of my patients, they're thrown on SSRIs, right, to work on serotonin, or Xanax and benzos to work on the GABA to support those systems. Again, which are okay, but I'm more about getting your foot off the accelerator, right? Because we can build our own neurotransmitters, but you're going to keep exhausting them if pedal to the metal and we're stuck in stress physiology. So there's a lot of support that has to happen. And we already talked about the thyroid suppression. Gene says, I also have some peripheral neuropathy. Tried low-dose levothyroxine, burned my legs. So you're sensitive. B6 burned your legs. Should I treat the adrenals with bovine adrenal cortex first and worry about the thyroid later? Okay, so yes, you want to treat the adrenals first before the thyroid. I talked a little bit about that earlier for sure, because it's the adrenal issues that are suppressing the thyroid. So that's definitely key. You can't just use adrenal cortex, which is kind of an adrenal glandular, just like nutrition for the gland. That one thing alone is not going to fix all of this. I mean, you probably need some guidance, but the answer to that question is absolutely you want to treat the adrenals first, because then you'll have a shot at not suppressing the thyroid and getting that to kick back in. So absolutely treat the adrenals first. Raka says, I'm considering getting the core program. Does it show people when they can increase exercise, increase supplements without crashing and getting worse? Yes. So there is guidance. The core program is one of our kind of step down programs to treat adrenal fatigue. So all that information is in there, all the guidance. Exercise is something you have to be cautious with for sure. That information is in there. I've done kind of all these videos basically on it where I explain the fact that initially we need to back off of exercise. The key is listening to your body, because your body will tell you, right? Some information that my patients hear from me quite often is you want to listen to your body because your body never lies. Your mind, however, will lie at the drop of a hat. So listen to your body. Your body will guide you. If you feel worse after exercise, either that day, the next day, then you did too much, too intense, too frequent, too long, right? So intensity, frequency. So you want to back off of that. And the whole process within the core program, we talk about the process. And the process is, well, you got to calm people down first before you can support. And support is supplements, as well as kind of increasing activity, things like that. But it's all about calming first. That whole process is laid out in all of those programs. Okay. Nina says, okay, we got a few more minutes and more questions than we have time for, but by all means, keep leaving the questions. And also, I guess I'm supposed to say, like the page, subscribe to the page, share it with whoever you think might have some of these issues. And that's the biggest problem with this, is that most people don't know they have adrenal fatigue, right? We medicate for it. We self-medicate for it with whether it's coffee or energy drinks or sugar or nicotine or alcohol, right? A lot of us are self-medicating for this, but we don't even know that this is adrenal fatigue is a thing. We've got the symptoms, But we just pay attention to those symptoms, right? Whether it's the anxiety, the depression, blood pressure issues, blood sugar issues, sleep problems, brain fog. Or on the other side, right, we've got irritable bowel and immune system problems, chronic infections. These are really easy and distracting. People kind of chase after this stuff. But if you look at these things together, there is an underlying cause, which could be this adrenal fatigue. That's what you want to get investigated. My father has one of the most severe cases of adrenal fatigue I've ever seen, and I research a lot about this. Are there cases where people are too far gone to heal? I have patients who are in my program who have Addison's disease, and Addison's disease is complete adrenal failure, complete. They can also be helped, because what you want to remember, Nina, it's not just the adrenals. It's the whole of the stress response. So, no, I would say people heal at a different rate, right? But don't give up on your father. It absolutely can heal. You gotta hit it from this kind of bigger perspective, and you gotta hit it in a holistic way. Okay. Okay. Rosemarie says, I feel very weak for years. Doctor says cortisol is fine. Again, doctors are measuring blood cortisol, most of them. And I've also seen salivary cortisols be misinterpreted quite a bit as well. So I become very weak, have osteoarthritis, hands deformed, hard bed, difficult breathing at night, ready to give up. Doctor says you're fine, and I know I'm not. If you know you're not fine, get another doctor. Doctors, they've got blinders on. That's the biggest problem, is they're going to have blinders on. If that doctor can't help you, find somebody who can. And if you fit, so we have an assessment tool, right? A quiz. Basically, if you start checking off these boxes, if any of this sounds familiar, then it might be that you have adrenal fatigue. Reach out. I've got patient coordinators who are some of the most compassionate people around, who are you can set up a phone consultation for, complimentary phone consultation, touch base, see what makes sense. Because with this condition, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we kind of know what you're dealing with. Okay. Ronnie says, hi, Ronnie. What if my cortisol levels are normal, according to my saliva test, but my DHEA is almost non-existent? What I was saying earlier, Ronnie, was DHEA is the tell. DHEA is absolutely key, because your DHEA, it doesn't go down first, right? First of all, it goes up first, then it starts coming down through normal, and then it ends up low. When there's a low DHEA, that means you're in at least, or I'd say at best, a middle stage of adrenal fatigue, possibly a later stage of adrenal fatigue. But the later stage is where not only the DHEA is low, but now the cortisol is low. The body prioritizes cortisol over DHEA, because cortisol is life-saving. You cannot live without cortisol, but it'll send all of its energy, all of its hormone towards making that cortisol, at the detriment of everybody else, all the other adrenal hormones, which include DHEA, but also your adrenals are also producing some of your ovarian hormones, whether that's testosterone, progesterone, even some estrogen. And it's more important in and around menopause, perimenopause, postmenopausal women. In fact, when we test the ovarian hormones in postmenopausal women, a good chunk of those hormones, they're coming from the adrenals, not the ovaries. If the adrenals have room, if they're not kind of beat up by the time that phase of life happens, which is why we see menopausal symptoms. So interestingly enough, even when women will talk to me about menopausal symptoms, I'm always good. That's an adrenal problem. It's not an ovarian problem, right? The ovaries are supposed to kind of gradually decline in function, right? That's what they do. It's a normal, natural process, but the adrenals are supposed to come in and save the day and ease that transition. And if that doesn't happen, that's an issue. But if ever there's low DHEA, that hands down, that's you've got adrenal problems. Okay, I think this is probably the last one. So Jessica says, I have an upcoming surgery. I know my limbic system needs to be rewired. Would it be best to heal a bit first before surgery, or go ahead and do it before digging my heels in? Well, it depends on the surgery, of course, right? If it's if it's an urgent kind of thing. If it's something that can be delayed safely, conservatively, of course, right? And you would want to talk to your physician about this. If it's something that can be delayed and put off, then strengthening that system first would help. Because any surgery, anytime you cut somebody open, that's a stress on the physiology. The body's got to heal and repair. And if our physiology is here, right, healing and repair is over here, remember, right? So we've got to, you got to shift that physiology to be able to heal and repair as efficiently as possible, right? So I would dig in first, because if you treat and start to balance the adrenal fatigue, all of that support is going to make the stress from the surgery be less of a hit, and it'll be stimulating your body's ability to heal and repair more efficiently. So I would say start with the adrenals, but obviously, talk to your physician. Okay, we are out of time, unfortunately, and never seemingly out of questions. I apologize if I didn't get to your question. We will get to those questions next time, for sure. Keep them coming in, and by all means, share any of this. Subscribe. Go to my YouTube channel. I've got a lot of this information on my YouTube channel. There's a lot of videos there. Take a look at that. Check us out on social media. And we'll do it again in a couple of weeks. We're just going to continue to try to do this to kind of get as much accurate information out there about this ridiculously misunderstood condition, as much as possible. So we'll keep doing it. All my best, everybody. Good luck. Bye.